Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly wild ride, the chaotic, inspiring, and sometimes totally tragic transformation of Europe. We're talking about the journey from the literal Dark Ages to a period of just unprecedented human brilliance. We're covering a massive historical arc today, looking at a timeline that literally redefined what human beings are capable of achieving.
So, we have to start with this core mystery, right? How exactly did a continent that was absolutely crippled by violence and famine manage to pivot and give birth to history's greatest geniuses? It's almost hard to wrap your head around the fact that the exact same region that suffered through centuries of starvation and tribal warfare became the incubator for the modern world's most profound art, science, and philosophy. Like, how did that flip even happen?
Well, let's get into Section 1, Europe's Era of Darkness. Because to really appreciate the light, we first have to understand the shadows of the post-Roman era. We're talking roughly 400 to 500 years after the birth of Jesus. When the mighty Roman Empire collapsed, Europe essentially just shattered. It was overrun by various tribal groups who, well, let's just say they didn't exactly use diplomacy to solve their issues. Violence became the default language, leading to this grueling period of famine, petty wars, and just a total stagnation of societal progress.
This comparison really nails down that massive cultural shift. During the Dark Ages, you had a society locked in constant warfare, where human potential was just entirely crushed by violence, famine, and barbarian rule. But then, this monumental shift happens, the Renaissance. Suddenly, society pivots toward curiosity, art, science, philosophy, and the rise of organized states. This wasn't just some gradual, slow improvement. It was a total reimagining of what humans are supposed to do with their time on Earth.
And that massive pivot is exactly what we call the Renaissance. The term itself is actually a French word that literally translates to rebirth. And this rebirth kicked off in the 15th century, sparking to life in this small Italian village called Florence. From there, prioritizing education, science, and art, this awakening rapidly spread out to places like Holland, Belgium, Sweden, and Portugal. Society finally started embracing politics, literature, and philosophy as, essential parts of everyday life.
All right, moving on to Section 2, the dawn of the Renaissance. As the constant warfare finally started to cool down in the 14th and 15th centuries, a new, unbelievably powerful force took hold in society: curiosity. I mean, think about it. When you aren't constantly fighting for your life or starving, you finally have the mental bandwidth to just look around and wonder about the universe.
And that led to an absolute explosion of the word why. People abruptly stopped accepting the old dogmas and just frantically started questioning absolutely everything. They wanted to know, how does the human body actually work? What is the specific role of blood? They looked up and asked, how far is the sun from the earth? Does the sun orbit us, or do we orbit it? They're asking what causes rain and lightning, and is the earth flat or round? It was just this sudden, massive thirst for real answers.
Which brings us to Section 3, the Age of Discovery. Because this tidal wave of questions inevitably forced brave individuals to actually go out and map the edges of human knowledge and geography. You couldn't just ask these questions sitting in a room, people had to physically go find the answers, which kicked off this incredible era of exploration and invention.
Let's look at how fast these milestones compounded on this timeline. In 1439, Johannes Gutenberg invents the printing press in Germany. Before this, books were incredibly rare, but suddenly, knowledge is being mass-produced. Then, boom, the 1490s hit, and explorers like Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus are setting sail to find new sea routes to the ancient riches of India. Fast forward to the 1500s, and Ferdinand Magellan is literally circumnavigating the globe to physically prove the Earth is round. In just a few decades, humanity unlocked mass communication and quite literally connected the entire world.
Now, naturally, this aggressive pursuit of truth really threatened the established order. For centuries, religious contractors had leveraged a God-fearing society for their own interests. But society began shifting. People started favoring factual, high-minded thinkers. If you had hard evidence, you suddenly had more influence than someone just relying on orthodox traditions. Even Latin, which had completely dominated for so long, started to fade as people began communicating new ideas in their local languages, making them accessible to everyday people.
And as those old traditions were uprooted, commerce absolutely exploded, turning cities like Florence and Venice into incredibly wealthy, dynamic epicenters of trade and innovation. Florence became globally famous for exquisite gold jewelry, colorful precious stones, and fine silk, just packed with wealthy, busy merchants driving the economy. Meanwhile, Venice became this thriving maritime powerhouse, famous for importing exotic goods from the East and producing spectacular glass. These cities became the economic engines that actually funded all the art and science defining the era.
Okay, Section 4, the devastating Black Death. Because this era of immense progress definitely had a horrifying shadow creeping across the continent in the 14th century. While art and trade were flourishing, a silent killer was basically hitching a ride on those exact same trade routes.
What's incredibly interesting here is how the source material draws a direct parallel to our modern world. The plague, which started in China in 1334, traveled along merchant trade routes, eventually hitting the ports of Sicily and pouring into Europe. It shows that the very trade networks that brought immense wealth also created massive vulnerability. It really makes you reflect on how global pandemics spread today, right? We all definitely know a thing or two about how quickly things move across an interconnected world.
And the sheer scale of the devastation back then is almost unfathomable. Take a look at this. The disease wiped out roughly 32% of Europe's entire population, nearly a third. It was basically an apocalyptic event right in the middle of this era of enlightenment, bringing progress to a screeching halt.
To put that 32% into perspective, that translates to roughly 2.5 crore, or 25 million people, who tragically perished during this massive health crisis. It is a staggering, heartbreaking number that completely reshaped the demographics, the labor forces, and the societal structures of Europe for generations to come.
Getting into Section 5, the genius of Da Vinci. Because despite the unimaginable tragedy of the plague, human resilience won out. This 400-year rebirth still managed to produce legends like Michelangelo, Raphael, and Donatello. But there is one figure who stands entirely above the rest, a guy whose mind was seemingly without limits.
In the hills about 30 miles west of Florence, a child was born on April 15, 1452, in a small village called Vinci. And this individual would grow up to basically define the absolute ceiling of human potential during the Renaissance.
We are, of course, talking about Leonardo da Vinci. And he wasn't just a master painter or a sculptor. Look at this list. He was an architect, a musician, a mechanical engineer, a geologist, a scientist, a mathematician, and a physicist. He didn't just casually dabble in these things, he mastered them simultaneously. It is genuinely mind-blowing to see that much brilliance concentrated in one single human being. Which brings us to Section 6, Final Thoughts. The Renaissance completely transformed humanity. It proved that when we collectively decide to embrace curiosity, education, and art over warfare, our potential is literally limitless. From exploring the stars to understanding the blood in our own veins, this era built the foundation for the world we live in today.
But before we wrap up this explainer, the source material leaves us with a totally bizarre fact of the day that actually ties back to those early Renaissance anatomists. Did you know it is physically impossible to commit suicide simply by holding your own breath? Yup. Your body's autonomic nervous system will always kick in and force you to breathe. It's a strange yet super fascinating testament to the survival mechanisms built into the very bodies those Renaissance thinkers were so desperate to study.
And honestly, that leaves us on a massive cliffhanger today. We barely even scratched the surface of Leonardo da Vinci, and our source material makes it abundantly clear that his life is packed with so many extraordinary secrets and events that it needs its own dedicated deep dive. So, what were those specific events? What other impossible things did he achieve? Well, that is exactly what we're going to unpack next time. Keep questioning, keep learning, and thanks for joining me on this explainer.